Atkinson is here. He teaches at BU, teaches writing. He's written several fiction and several nonfiction books. He just got picked up to write a book on Hannah Duston, so that should be fantastic.
2000 and what's next year?
2014?
2014. No, 2015.
2015 that
The
will come out?
manuscript will be turned in next year.
Excellent, excellent. And tonight he is doing a talk on the adventures of a street journalist, which I think is going to kind of cover a lot of several of your books.
Yeah, and some stuff that's not in books, just
Yeah.
to get an idea of like the stuff that you can do. A lot of times people think of a writer as someone just sits in a room and with a typewriter and they don't go anywhere, which never really appealed to me as much. I'm kind of torn between active and contemplative things. So I'll talk about some of the adventures I've had that are yet to be in books but will eventually.
And as a multi-sport athlete,
Yeah, well, the
Rugby
number of
and
sports
ice
are
hockey
diminishing
and-
now. But I
mine's
did play rugby a lot.
stopped,
I
so.
did play rugby in Philadelphia about 3 weeks ago, and that was
So,
fun.
but I just want to welcome Jay and welcome you all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good to see you.
Thanks for inviting me. So I'm gonna open and close today with just a brief reading from two different books. So I'll read a little bit of this book, then I'll tell a few stories off the top of my head, and then I'll read a tiny bit of this other book, just to give you an idea of what kind of thing that I do, that I enjoy doing, and that the sort of thing that my talk is focused on today. So in 2010, I published this book, Paradise Road, and it is retracing the Lowell, Massachusetts writer Jack Kerouac's most famous book, On the Road, which was published in 1957 to universal acclaim, in which I teach his book and a course about Jack Kerouac at Boston University every fall. So in 2007, on the 50th anniversary of the publication of On the Road, and celebrating my own 50th birthday, I took the 5 cross-continental trips that Kerouac took in the late 1940s. And my book is sort of a comparison and a respectful homage to Kerouac, because I really admire Kerouac's writing, his spirit, his sort of blend of Catholicism and Buddhism I think is fascinating, and the fact that Kerouac was a Merrimack Valley guy who was also a multi-sport athlete. So I relate to him as a Roman Catholic, as a athlete, as a Merrimack Valley kid, and as a knockaround guy, because as he grew up in Lowell's poor neighborhoods, the French-Canadian neighborhoods of the 1930s and 40s, we grew up in the poor neighborhoods of Lawrence and Methuen as kids. So I'm from a blue-collar family. I was the first kid in my family to go to college, and then the 4 siblings came after me. My parents were not college educated. They scrimped and saved so we could all go to school. And so I have a lot of respect for working people, because we are them, we are those people. And a lot of times when I go listen to writers, I'm just amazed at the pomposity of their delivery. I'm educated too, but that doesn't mean that you have to talk down to people when you go meet with people. So in this particular adventure, this took place in 2008, I think, the end of 2008. I went to Mexico with a friend of mine. We drove from Denver, Colorado to Mexico City, which is what Kerouac did in 1949. It's a lot different than it was then. It's still inexpensive to go to Mexico. The people are still friendly, but it's enormously dangerous, particularly for Americans. And if you're driving a nice car and it has U.S. plates on it, and you are, middle class, you are a target for kidnapping, for harassment, for the drug cartels. It's just an enormously dangerous place right now. And if you read the news and you hear about what goes on, basically the drug cartels run the country. The military and the police have been totally infiltrated by the drug cartels. So when we were traveling there, we were going through customs stops and being stopped at checkpoints by the police. My friend, who lives in Laredo, Texas, and has lived in Texas almost his entire life, he's a guy that I went to undergraduate school with who got me interested in Kerouac. He was drafted by Major League Baseball, and both his brothers played Major League Baseball. So he's a baseball coach now, and he still plays. He's over 50, and he plays in the Mexican League as a pitcher. When he was young, he used to throw the ball really hard, and now he throws like junk. But he still plays against young, potentially professional caliber baseball players. So he's totally fluent in Spanish, lives right on the border, and spends half the year playing and coaching baseball in Mexico when he's not teaching at Laredo Junior College. So this was the perfect guy to go with, because he speaks Spanish, he understands the border really well, and explained to me it's not just a line, it's a border zone. It's like 50 miles on the US side and 50 miles on the Mexican side is all one country of its own, which a lot of times the politicians that are setting immigration policy don't understand that. That the people that live in Nuevo Laredo on the Mexican side, all their relatives are on the other side in Laredo, and they need to be able to go back and forth so they can have the same family relations that you have when you visit your cousin in Newbury and your other cousin in North Andover. So this was
like
really
100 miles of barren land? I don't think I knew
no,
that.
it's built up on both sides. I mean,
Within the 100 miles?
yeah, I mean, depends on where you cross the
I
border
don't
now.
think I knew that.
Laredo is a town in the United States, and
Right, no,
you
I
go
know
over the
that.
river,
Right.
and there's Nuevo Laredo, the
Right,
Mexican town.
Right.
So 100 years ago, 50 years ago, when there wasn't all this drug violence, people knew the border patrol guys, and they would just say, they would walk
Right,
over
right.
and visit their cousins.
Okay.
Now they want to put a fence up there and keep them from visiting their cousins. But more importantly to my story, it's the violent aspect of being an American tourist and United States tourist going into Mexico. So this is what happened. This is how we felt and what I saw when we crossed the border. Never one to exaggerate, Keith has told me horrifying stories about former students of his, guys he coached in baseball, junior college kids, who got mixed up in the cartels trying to make a fast buck and ended up being murdered. Shot execution style, asphyxiated, beheaded, you name it. It's much worse now than when I was last here to play rugby in the 90s, and as we roll into Nuevo Laredo, I wonder what we'll find in what Kerouac called the magic land at the end of the road. Now we're inching along, spotlight to spotlight, on the road to Monterey. Keith says the nightclub and bar business in Nuevo Laredo has all but shut down because of the violence perpetrated by the drug cartels, which run just about everything and operate brazenly in the midst of Mexico's general culture. It's not astronomical by American standards, says Keith, of the local murder rate, but they do it in broad daylight. Bang, 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 old-fashioned shootouts. The nicest structure in town is a giant cemetery behind pink stucco walls, occupied by 1,000 statues of Jesus to 3/4 scale, standing over the vaults with outstretched arms. A small personalized Christ for the myriad lost souls of Nuevo Laredo, and our mad journey deep into the country begins with a dirge as a funeral procession goes winding around an interior road. Keith speculates that the black-clad mourners are grieving over another drug cartel victim. A pound of very good marijuana is $100 over here, he says, but when they make a bust on the U.S. side, they value that pound at $1,000. It used to be $500, but if they get lucky and stumble over a bunch of smugglers, it sounds more impressive to say you seized $2 million worth of pot than $1 million worth of pot. One thing's for sure, the junkyards of Nuevo Laredo are legion. Just beyond a sign that says Yonke in huge crooked black letters are more ruined cars than Lowell's Ernest Automobile Boneyards ever thought of. Cars without title or name, imponderable hulks that once ferried the skeletons of men, women, and children, long buried under the stone statues of diminutive Jesus, their ashtrays filled with the dust of hands that held the dust of cigarette ash years upon years ago. Mexico seems like nothing more than the tired, overwrought junkyard of America, protected for all eternity by the Lamb of God. As I ride along the dusty highway, it strikes me that I could produce a pretty comprehensive documentary film of my trips across the U.S. by compiling all the surveillance video I've wandered into. Parking lots, hotel lobbies, restaurant waiting areas, ATMs, highway off-ramps, and street corners have become the new Hollywood studios of America, generating innumerable cinematic epics of la comédie humaine by the hour. This is the fulfillment of Ken Kesey's prophecy during the Merry Prankster's journey across America that one day we'll all be stars in a great movie that depicts each and every person's tiniest thought and movement. Somewhere among the uniformed personnel monitoring all this footage is the next Erich von Stroheim, the next Bertolt Brecht, a dime store auteur who will mold this raw material into a heartbreaking film that will resolve once and for all what we're doing to one another on this planet. Not so Mexico. When you cross the border here, you fall off the grid. Even in Nuevo Laredo, so close to the American side, there's the sense that your most grievous sins will be ignored rather than forgiven. It's hard to describe exactly, but it's like a place with no adult supervision. Rolling onto the plain that lies beyond the last crumbling house, an old tune by Tom T. Hall is playing in my head. Faster horses, younger women, older whiskey, and more money. Keith was right. What happens in Mexico stays in Mexico. They say that about Vegas, but I've been to Vegas. Vegas ain't like Mexico. So I'll segue from that into talking about when you go to grad school. I went to graduate school at the University of Florida for writing. And when you go to grad school, your professors write these, after you finish your coursework, they write these like assessments of your work and they put them in your file. And one of my favorite professors was this guy, Alistair Duckworth, who appears in my newest book, which is this Memoirs of a Rugby Playing Man. He was a Scotsman. He was a very diminutive, quiet fellow, and he kind of looked like the guy that played the father on that show, Eight Is Enough. Kind of like golf shirts and khakis and his hair combed over, bald spot. Scottish burr, spoke with a Scottish burr. Very interesting fellow. He's a world-renowned Jane Austen scholar. He's retired from the University of Florida now, and he's back in Scotland. And occasionally, I haven't heard from him in a while, but occasionally we would trade like letters and emails. But what I didn't know until I went to his office one day was he had once played representative rugby for Scotland, which is really tough. I mean, I played representative rugby for New England, and that was tough. He played under 21 for the under 21 Scotland team, which would have been quite a skillful team. And this probably would have been like in the 1960s when he was under 21, maybe even the late 50s. So he was an interesting guy, and we were pretty simpatico. I took his theories of literary criticism class, and afterwards he wrote his assessment, and he said, J. Atkinson's writing and his life seems to be an attempt to balance the active life with the contemplative life, which was absolutely true. And I didn't realize it that in that sense until I read his assessment after I graduated with my master's in creative writing. Like, my life had, up till the time that I became a serious student, was outdoors, was like sports related, and a lot of outdoor adventures. And then I became a writer, and I wanted to find a way to like put those two things together. So half my time is spent in a room with a notebook and pencil, which is how I like to write my first drafts, and then with a laptop computer after that. But I started a few years ago adapting notebooks of this size, so I could put them back here in my shorts, and I could go out and do things and mingle with people that didn't know I was a writer, and then take that stuff home and use it in stories. So I'll just give you a couple examples of that. In the early 90s, before my son was born, it was like the last summer I was going to have before my son was born, I went on a trip to Europe for about 2.5 months, and I went with one of my rugby friends from the University of Florida. He's an ex-Marine. He is ex-NASA aerospace engineer, because he worked at NASA. He's a surfer. He's a blonde-haired guy, dark tan. You know, he looks like a surfer on a TV show. But he was in West Point. He got thrown out of West Point when he was a junior. Came to University of Florida, and that's how we met playing rugby. And then he went into the Marine Corps after that. He wanted to go to flight school and be an astronaut because he grew up right next to Cocoa Beach. And he was off the charts, like athletically, scholastically, like really smart engineer. He was in the Marine Corps for about a year. He had to go back through basic again because he did Army basic for West Point, and then he went through basic with the Marines. went through OCS, became a second lieutenant, and then they said, oh, you got thrown out of West Point, so you can't be a flyer. So he was like, well, that's not what my recruiter told me. He said I could go be a flyer, that they understood that it was like, it was a series of like unfortunate events, like Lemony Snicket. And so he ended up like sitting another year as an active Marine, working in like, I think in Fort Campbell, or no, someplace in Kentucky, where he was like handing out basketballs at the gym. Wait until they were going to assign him either to flight school or they were going to give him an honorable discharge and make him a reservist. So they did. They gave him an honorable discharge, made him a reservist. He went to work for NASA. After 9/11, he went to the FBI and said, I already have a security clearance. I'm an ex-Marine. I want to work with you guys. They were hiring these language specialists and these analysts as civilian employees of the FBI. It would have been a $70,000 a year pay cut to move from his job as an aerospace engineer into an FBI analyst job, analyzing all this data we're collecting from these terrorists. But he was willing to do it and take a pay cut because he was a military guy and he wanted to help like the U.S. security. And they got all the way to the last interview, and he was going to be hired for like $40,000 that he had made right out of college at NASA. And they said, it says on your record that you smoked pot twice in high school. He said, yeah? Like, who did it? And they said, well, we can't take anyone that smoked pot to work for the FBI. And he said, well, let me tell you something. They had just offered him the job, and this was like before he signed, they said, oh, by the way, would you sign this other waiver that says you never smoked marijuana? He said, no, I'm not going to sign that. It's not true. And they said, well, we're only going to hire, he said, if you only hire analysts that never smoke pot, you're going to get the nerds from high school who are never going to defeat the terrorists. Thank you. This interview is over. And then he left. So he's a character, this guy. And he ended up going back to school about 4 years ago. He got his PhD in ocean engineering. He left NASA, and now he's working on his postdoc. He's a postdoctorate fellow at FIT, and he's studying, he sees the ocean, the space program has been cut to nothing. He sees the ocean as like the future for food, for renewable energy, for surfers, because he wants to like build artificial reefs which protect the coastline and also create bigger waves. So he's always got an angle. So in this particular story, Surfer John, my best friend from college, convinces me we're in Europe, we're in Spain, we're going to go run with the bulls. So we go to Pamplona, and it's just picture like if you've ever been to Mardi Gras, or if you've ever been to like Vegas, just picture that times 50. We go into the square that Hemingway made famous in The Sun Also Rises, the main square in Pamplona, which is a small town. Now, the Fiesta de San Fermin, the Festival of St. Fermin, is a religious festival. So you see it on MTV, it's like an athletic event, and it just occurred this past week. It's people riding, and the bulls are there, but the original reason for the festival is St. Fermin. San Fermin was martyred by bulls. So they killed him for his religious beliefs. So when they run with the bulls, it's paying like respect to St. Fermin. So we're sitting out there in the sea of people. Everybody's drinking wine and beer, and opposite us is a statue that's in that plaza. And there's a bar there called the Muscle Bar. I think it's Mussel, and all people were gathering around this statue, drinking wine and beer, and people going in and out. It's like happy hour. And the run is every morning, I think it's 6:45 or 7 a.m. local time. So this is the evening before. We take a bus. We arrive in Pamplona. We start talking to people. People in rugby T-shirts everywhere, so we start talking to rugby guys. We sit down. We're drinking a few beers. There's people climbing up the Muscle statue, and it'd be about 30 feet off the ground. Now it's pavement. It's like flagstones. Diving off into the crowd. It's called like crowd surfing, stage diving. Now, we've done this at the University of Florida with our rugby friends, but these are guys like that you've played rugby with for 2 or 3 years. They're all strapping guys. They're going to catch you. Yeah. They know you. You trust them. They trust you. So I saw a guy jump off a building almost as tall as that building out there and jump into a phalanx of like rugby players, and we caught him. And like guys broke their wrists to make sure this guy didn't get hurt, Now, this Muscle Bar, they're climbing up the statue and jumping off, and it's all strangers. It's just a bunch of drunks down there. So my buddy and I, we're like all the people that travel in Europe are all in their 20s. Like all the people that go to the hostels and go from, like we had done, you know, Switzerland to Denmark to Paris. They're all idiots for the most part. So we're like the old hands here. Like we've been traveling a lot together. We've been to Africa together. We've been on all these trips together. So we're sitting there and we're watching people jump off this statue and we're drinking a beer and we're going, this is not going to end well. And sure enough, we were sitting there and we just met all these Irish guys. These guys that were wearing rugby shirts. They were from Ireland. They're all talking about they're going to run with the Bulls the next morning, and they're all talking big about it. And we see this people jumping off. You know, you look for a little while and then you're talking to other people. I mean, there's people everywhere. So all of a sudden you hear like screaming and ambulances coming. Apparently some 21-year-old Kiwi girl from New Zealand, climbed up there and they weren't ready and she jumped and she got killed. And like my buddy who'd been, you know, in a lot of scary, sketchy places before said, this is what we're dealing with. Like, this place is like the Wild West. Like, we got to take care of ourselves because like some poor person that was traveling with her was going to have to call her parents back in like Christchurch and say, your daughter died and jumping off a statue. Because a lot of Aussies and Kiwis, when they graduate high school, they spend a year doing a walkabout. They go around the globe. And you'll see them like at Hampton Beach, and then you could go to vacation in London and you'll see them there with the Kiwi flag like on their backpacks. So while we're sitting there, this local guy comes up, speaks a little English. He's sitting with us, young guy, not very well built, kind of like a skinny kid. And he starts talking to us. He goes, you run with the Bulls, you should run with me. And he said, I'm from here. I know how to do it. I do it every year. And like these Irish guys are all talking trash, like we're going to run right in front of those Bulls, and we're going to, you know, take on the Bulls and all stuff. And this guy goes, don't listen to them. Like, listen to me. So my buddy and I, we've already seen that this could be a dangerous place. So I said, oh, I like this kid. I think he knows what he's talking about. So he said, I'll meet you. And these other guys said they would meet him too. I'll meet you guys tomorrow morning at 6:30 at this place, like where we get on the course to run with the Bulls, okay? So we get there, of course, none of the Irish guys show up. So, because after you know, we weren't drinking. We were like, this is going to be serious. These guys were all drinking, and all of a sudden they had their beer muscles on. Like, yeah, we're going to run with the Bulls. The next morning they woke up and saw the Bulls in the pen and went, ah.
That's if they woke up.
Yeah, so we go down and, now picture this now, it's only like a third of a mile. It's cobblestones that are slippery with red wine. It looks like blood. It goes uphill slightly and then at an angle, at another angle, into a giant stadium, which is a bullfighting stadium. So it's a round, it looks like the Coliseum in a way. It doesn't have a roof over it. It's completely round, and inside is the bull ring. There's no football field. It's not a soccer or a rugby stadium. It's just for bullfighting. So you start at the beginning of this course, and you run this sort of like dog leg course into the stadium. And it's only, people think it's a long run and you're running for miles. It's just like about a third of a mile, maybe a little bit more, under a half a mile. But it's uphill, it's slippery, it's hard. And on the side are like hockey boards that they put up temporarily for the festival that are about this high to keep the Bulls from getting out into the town. And also, once you commit to this, you're in there. There's nowhere to go. So we're there, and they have a countdown. At 7 o'clock, they shoot a rocket, like a firework, up in the air. And then when the last bull leaves the paddock, which is around, out of sight, behind a church, the bulls come up this chute. When the last bull is out of the paddock and they're all in the course, they shoot up a second rocket. So the guy that we're running with, he pulls us over to the side, and he puts us against the boards, and he says, wait, wait. As soon as the first rocket goes up, everybody runs. Everybody's, all the tourists, all the like people that don't know what they're doing, they all take off and they all run into each other, and it becomes a huge pile up, and people are like panicking. It's like the Titanic. So like he's saying, wait, wait, wait. Your instinct is you can hear the clunk, 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 clunk. Everything gets real quiet. All the sound goes away. You get hypersensitive to everything. Like everything slows down, and all your senses go to like a whole different level. My friend said it's like having live rounds shot at you. That's what it felt like. All of a sudden, like, everything all the sound there's all people hanging over the sides, drinking wine, yelling, cheering. Just before the first rocket got up, people were asking to be pulled out. Like they chickened out, they were like, get me out of here, and they're putting their hands up to strangers, and strangers were like throwing them up. So everybody runs, huge pile of, like a human pyramid in the middle of the thing, and now the bulls are getting closer, and people are trying to get off the ground, they're all tangled up, and that's when people get hurt. So this guy's like, wait, just wait. The bulls come around the corner, and like the people that are in the pile are like trying to get to the sides, and he said, now start jogging. So we start running, and he had told us beforehand, like, he goes, I will pat the bull. If you pat the bull, that's a huge sign of like you have big cojones. As he would say. So like, I'm running. John, we'd been in Africa right before that, so I had like the African version of Montezuma's Revenge. So I was sick for a couple days. I didn't feel like running at all. But once those bulls started running, so my friend, he's a real good runner. John has been doing like marathons and triathlons for a while, so he took off. So he was a little bit ahead of us, and I was running with the Spanish kid, and he said, just let the bulls come alongside you. Don't run in front of them, and don't try to run away from them, and don't avoid them, because they don't see very well. So if you're running alongside them, they think you're part of the herd. But if you distract them or you make them turn their head, they can focus in on you and start chasing you. So we're running along the bulls. These things are massive. And they come up. The first day, I think there's 8 bulls, and every day they add a bull for 8 days. Till the end, it's like 16 of them. So we're on the second day. There's 9 bulls, and behind them are 12 steers, like that they use to herd the bulls, to try to keep them from turning around and coming back down the course. So as we're running along, this guy runs out there and he strokes the side of the bull, and I go, you gotta be kidding me, dude. I'm like about 10 feet away, and he said, you want it? And I was like, I'm fine, right here. You just keep running. Now it gets narrower. So as you're getting closer to the stadium, bulls can run as well uphill as they can, probably better than they can downhill, because they're kind of front heavy. So they start to pick up a little speed, and you have to run a little harder to stay with them. And he said, you don't want to fall too far behind, because if you enter the stadium way before the bulls, all the aficionados, all the bullfighting fans will whistle, which is like booing. Like, in other words, you're afraid. So you ran too fast, so you outran the bulls. And if you come in behind the bulls, they shut the doors. So to be a real, like, Festival of San Fermin participant, you want to enter with the bulls. And then everyone throws roses and they say, ole. So I'm like, ole, okay. So we're running along, we get to where it's getting narrower and narrower. And now the boards have gone, and there's like a stockade fence like you see in the stockyards, like with space between the runs. So we're just about 50 yards from the entrance to the stadium. And the guy running with me, the Spanish guy, says, this is good. We're going to go right in behind the bulls with the steers behind us. So we're going to be kind of like, just get in, right at the biggest moment of glory. So we're like, oh, great. All of a sudden, one of the bulls gets turned around, and you can see the people in front of you just going, parting, because this is the most dangerous thing. This is how people get killed. The bull gets turned around and starts coming at the people that are running after the bulls. So I saw this bull coming, and you're like, which way do I go, right or left? And there's people everywhere. And sure enough, the bull focused, just like the kid said he would, he focused on one person. And that person was doing every kind of fake they could think of, and other people were trying to distract the bull, and it chased that kid in and out of other people. And then finally, he saw a little space under that bottom rung, and the kid dived like right in front of me, like on the cobblestones, like scuttled under, and the bull went right under, tried to get his horns under there, like to get the kid. It was unbelievable. I was like, it was right in front of us, and the Spanish kid said, go around, go in. We go into the stadium, and all of a sudden, like 10,000 people in there going, ole, ole, like throwing roses and calling to us and everything, and everybody's like bowing to us, and we're like, run around in there. Okay, now what? They take all the bulls out of the stadium. Everybody's kind of milling around, all the people that got that far, because a lot of people have quit now. So there's maybe about 100, 150 of us that have finished the run that are in there. And then they start releasing the bulls back into the stadium one at a time. So this is where the locals, who are not professional bullfighters but have grown up on these farms, this is a big bull raising region of the Basque region in Spain, they do their like local acts of daring. You know, they'll stand in front of the bull with a newspaper and go like that, and then like they get props for that from their peeps, like the people that live there. So we're just running around going, all right, this is chaos now, because the people are running every which way. It's sand, just like in a Tyrone Power movie. It's blood and sand, like, so we're running back and forth, like, bull over here, okay, watch out for that one, running this way. So we had convinced this kid from Brooklyn who was a cop. He was like a 28-year-old cop from Brooklyn. He was there for the festival. We convinced him to run. He wasn't going to do it, but he met us the night before, and we were having a couple beers, and we said, meet us, and he met us, and he's running. So there's a bull kind of chasing him, and he's twisting away from it, and the locals are very helpful. If they think you have, like, the right stuff and you're really doing it right, they'll try to help you. So they would cut in front of the bull and try to distract the bull and pull him away. So what happened was, the kid from Brooklyn was like just twisting away, and another bull caught him right in the chest. Ran him right over, like pummeled him, like just trampled him. And we were standing there like, and then they run out just like in a Monty Python. They run out with a stretcher, they throw the kid on the stretcher, and they take him away, and I look at Server, I go, I guess he's all right. So we start running along the boards, and there's a bull like with its haunch like coming right along. It's a circle, so he's coming right along. So we're running, and it's getting closer to us. And we go, all right. We've been out there for about 10 minutes, 10 minutes. And now we see one coming the other way. I go, okay, all right, it's over. This is it. We've made it this far. So we jump up and we pull ourselves up, and the bull passes underneath us, and then we go into the stands. Oh, hey, somebody hands us a wine stand, start drinking wine. 7 o'clock in the morning, it could be like midnight. You're so jacked up on adrenaline. So when it ends, and they have all the amateurs out, and then the bullfighters get introduced, and then in the evening the bullfighters come back and actually kill the bulls that we had gone running with. But they get all the amateurs out, all the festival goers, and bullfighters come out in their suit of lights, and they all get introduced, and it's very, very formal ceremony. So by this point we're watching. Then when that ends, it's all over by like 8 o'clock, and then the locals and all the aficionados come back in the evening in their nice clothes, and they watch the actual bullfights. So now we're out on the plaza. Now, like, we're drinking glasses of beer this big, and it tastes like water, because you're just on adrenaline. So we're drinking beer, and we're talking, and there's a guy with us that we met who was a Special Forces captain, a U.S. Special Forces captain from Missouri, 30-year-old kid, and he was on vacation, and this is what he does for vacation. So he comes to Pamplona and runs with the bulls. Nice kid. So we're sitting there having a beer with him, me, Surfer, him, at those same tables that Hemingway describes, like outside the plaza, outdoor tables with little umbrellas, and the waiters come out with the white shirts with the aprons over the black pants, just like in The Sun Also Rises. So, and it's early enough to where not many people there except the people that ran, so you could kind of squint and say, this is what it was like in like 1923, So we're having a beer with this guy who's like, he looks like he's like from a movie playing a Special Forces guy, like he looks like Rock Hudson sitting there. So we're drinking beers, and over comes a cop from Brooklyn. And we're like, Brian, the kid was there, was like Brian O'Leary or something like that. We go, Brian, so good to see you. And he goes, yeah, he goes, when are we gonna run with the Bulls? And we go, I go, we just did. He goes, no, really, when does it run? So so he's got one of these flagons of beer in his hand, and like the Special Forces guy comes over, because they do all their own field like first aid. So he comes over and he says, he just takes the beer from him. He goes, follow my finger with your eyes. And he goes, this guy's got a grade 3 concussion. He can't remember. He can remember meeting us the night before. He can't remember that he just got run over. So the kid says to the military kid, the active military kid, the Special Forces kid said, there's an aid station over there. He goes, here. He gives us his wallet. He goes, here's my wallet. Here's like, watch these beers. I'm going to take him over to the aid station. So he takes the cop over to the aid station, comes back to us. Now we're sitting there, oh, that could be us. And we talk him into doing it. So we're having a beer, and the kid says, so this is the last line of this story. The kid says, the Special Forces kid says, you know what? He goes, I've been to Carnival in Rio. I've been to Mardi Gras. in New Orleans, and I've been to Oktoberfest in Munich, but this is the best party in the world. And we're like, he goes, and you know why? We go, why? He goes, because it has that element of danger. That's why.
Yeah.
And I was like, amen, brother. You survived. Let's have another drink. So, now flash forward, now that was like the 90s and I hadn't become a dad yet, so like now I got a kid and I gotta be, I'm his dad and I gotta take care of him, take him to hockey and all that, but I still gotta get out there and like have some fun once in a while. So, I do all these outdoor things and open water swimming and different, I still play rugby, I played rugby a few weeks ago. So I wrote this book called Legends of Winter Hill. So it was like a cop book. So I got to know all these troopers, FBI agents, and local cops in Boston. So after the book came out in 2007, I got to access to these different undercover units, task forces for like drug interdiction, gang task force, bank robbery task force, and I got to go on these operations with state police, FBI, and local cops to see how they do these like big scale operations, and I got to write articles about it for magazines. So I'd written this article called Snitch about the use of confidential informants in these big drug cases, and it appeared in Boston Globe magazine. And about 6 months after it came out, and at the end of the article, at the end of this operation, there had been a big arrest. So about 6 months after the article came out, I was still teaching at Salem State College in the writing program there. And I'm walking on campus one day. Now, by writing this book about the cop job, I irritated a lot of like bad guys, a lot of gangsters, like wannabe gangsters. Like the Kevin Weeks and the Bulger trial and all that that's going on right now. I have several chapters in there about the Davis family that were the brothers of Deborah Davis, who was strangled by Whitey. She was in today's article in the Globe that they're going to be getting to her case next because they've covered the Halloran murder, the Debbie Hussey murder. So I had gotten access to these files of a famous cop who had investigated the Davis brothers, who were in the cocaine business with Stevie Fleming and Whitey when she was killed, which they never talk about. When they're on TV saying, oh, the government owes us money for my poor sister being murdered, they never mention the fact that they were also cocaine dealers and they were in business with Stevie Fleming, and they knew that Stevie Fleming was not only having relations with the 26-year-old Deborah who was murdered, but this, her 14-year-old sister too. And Fleming was in his 40s, he was a creep. So, as a result of this article, Snitch, I didn't realize it at the time, but I'm walking across campus, and you can tell who the college kids are on any campus, and you know who the other professors are. And I see this guy with a scally cap and a bold neck coming right for me like this. And I go, all right, this guy is not a faculty member. And the guy approaches me and he gets right up in my face. He goes, are you Jay Atkinson? And I go, no. So I'm see what he's going to say. So he said, he's pissed, and he says, are you Jay Atkinson? I go, no. So he stalks off. So I go, oh, okay. So who is he? Is he like an affiliate of some of the people that I wrote about in the article? Is he like an affiliate of somebody from the book? He was definitely not from Salem. He was from like, Mattapan or Hyde Park or Chelsea or Everett. And he was not a nice fellow. So I was like, all right, so this guy, so I go into the English department office, and the secretary's not the brightest bulb in the bunch, and she says, there's just a guy in here looking for you. I go, yeah. I go, was he wearing a scally cap and he had no neck? He looked like somebody bashed his face in with a baseball bat. She goes, yeah, that was him. I told him that you teach in such and such a building at 2 o'clock. I go, Elaine, what if he was like a killer? On campus, you're supposed to have an ID. You're not supposed to be on that campus without checking in with campus police, and you're supposed to have either a student ID, a faculty ID, or a visitor's pass. So now I'm like, great, this guy knows it's me now, because he's going to walk in and see me. So I go into my creative writing class, like 25 kids there. I'm just about to start the class. The door opens, and the guy comes in, and he goes, Jay Atkinson, you've been served. He served me a subpoena. So then I'm thinking, oh good, phew, just a subpoena. I thought he was gonna shoot me.
Yeah, right.
So the guy says, you shouldn't effing lie to people, something like that. And I go, Now I know who it is, I know what the subpoena's for, I know this guy's been locked up, he's going to trial, and they want me as a witness. I go, and your client, Mr. Martinez, shouldn't sell heroin in a school zone. The guy's like, F you, and he leaves. My students thought it was fake. They thought this was like a rugby friend of mine. I was saying, okay, here's this scenario, now write a story about it. And they go, that was fake. I go, no, that was real. This is a real subpoena. So the reason why I got the subpoena was one night I was with Revere police detectives and the FBI agent in charge of the gang task force at what they call an offsite. It's not the police station. It's a place where the detectives can meet in plain clothes so they're not seen by their subjects going in and out of the police station. So we met, and all these guys, like there's guys from Lynn that I got friendly with. Most of them either played hockey or football when they were younger. Some were ex-military, like the first Iraq War. A lot of them were in their late 30s, early 40s. So we're at this offsite. We're getting ready. We think after this months-long investigation that they've done, and a month that I've spent like working on this article on how these informants are used to, like, bad guys are used to catch bad guys. And we're gonna make an arrest this night. They're gonna take this guy down, and I'm gonna get to go with them. But the more law enforcement agencies that get involved in these events, like when it's a big takedown, everybody wants in on it because there might be a lot of drugs in, and that's a lot of publicity. It gets harder for them to say, who's this guy? Like, why am I there? Because I don't have a sidearm, I don't have a badge. We're all sitting around this like offsite, which is an industrial park. So okay, the Revere and the Lynn police, they knew me. The FBI agent that was in charge of that task force, he already cleared me. I already got clearance from his boss. Reason? I coach his boss's son in hockey. So he goes, oh yeah, sure, Jay's all right. Give him my vest. So I had a vest, bulletproof vest. So I'm sitting there, now the state troopers come in, and they're undercover, and they look over, and they're like, who's this guy? What's he doing here? Because I wasn't at any of the briefings. I was just there for the takedown. So they said, oh, he's Jay Atkinson, he writes for the Globe. I was like, oh boy. It's going to go on the because they're not supposed to have their pictures in the paper, their names in the paper, any of that. Because these guys do the gun buying, they pretend to be bad guys. So there's this big strapping guy with a Red Sox hat from Dorchester, white guy, and then there's a small muscular guy, black guy, both troopers, but they look like street people, like toughs. So they go, look, there could be a foot chase here. And they say to the big guy, they go, there could be a foot chase here. You think, can you handle that, Rick? Because he looks like a big weightlifter guy. He goes, yeah, I'm an effing speedster, can't you tell? So I laughed. I thought that was funny. So then he came over, he goes, who are you? I shook his hand. So they said, okay, like after a while, they go, all right, if you're okay with him, they said to Revere Police, you're responsible for him. Like, we're not responsible for him, but we're not going to bitch about it, that's fine, he can come. So we get into these cars that make a perimeter around this guy's house in Revere. And this guy is in a nice neighborhood too, and he's selling heroin out there. And he's been selling heroin, his father sold heroin before him, and his grandfather before him. So they're ready to take him down as a way to get to the big Dominican dealer, is the guy they want, but they're gonna get this local guy first. So we get in a DPW van, and they have the Lieutenant of Revere Police is dressed like he works at the DPW. He's driving the van. We're all in the back. They got a camera. They got a little hole. They got a camera. They got guys with these kinds of weapons and banana clips and stuff I've never seen before. I'm like, whoa, this is for real. So we go up. I'm with the takedown team, and they have a perimeter of marked cars are about a mile away. Unmarked cars are about a quarter of a mile away, and then there's 3 vehicles that are going to converge on the house. So we have. The informant is calling us on the cell phone. I'm going to buy heroin from the address right now. The guy's there. He says he has like $500 worth of X number of baggies that I'm going to buy. So now they know the guy's there, the drugs are there, and we're creeping up. We park for a block, then we go another block. We park there. We're getting closer and closer. Now my heart's starting to go. I go, so how far can I go? And they go, how far do you want to go? I go, I don't know. So they all of a sudden they go, the guy's got the thing. He's go, okay, he's in the house. All right, let's go. They go, whoop, they open the door, everybody runs out. I just ran after them. I was like running down the street with my little notebook, back in my pants, and all hell broke loose. We get to the house, and the neighbors are looking out, and they see guys running towards the house with their guns out. And like some guys have the vest says FBI in the back, state police, and like everybody's converging to different parts. Somebody goes flying out the back of the house and they're chasing him. The guy that was coming to the house, the informant, has stopped outside the perimeter. Like, oh, I got stopped by the cops. That's why I couldn't come to buy the heroin. So we have to try to get, you know, they have to get the guy and get the drugs, otherwise the warrant looks bad. It looks bogus. I get to the edge of the driveway and something told me I shouldn't go on the property. It's like a ranch house right next to the street, short driveway, and there's a car there of the dealer that was coming to like pick up some of the drugs. So I get right to the edge of the private property and I stop. And now the cops are like everywhere. They're coming over my shoulder. They see that I'm with these guys. They go in, they grab the guy he's just answered the door. Somebody knocked on the door and then they all converge. So they grab the guy and they throw him into the driveway. And I'm standing about 15 feet away and I'm going, whoa. And the guy's trying to swallow the drugs. So he's got bags of drugs. And they're thinking, if the only drugs that are on site are in this guy's mouth, we're all going to look bad because this has been a month-long investigation. They had good tip that the drugs were here. They haven't had a chance to search yet. As it turns out, they searched the Camaro that was there, and there was like $2,000 worth of coke in the trunk. But this guy had bags of heroin, and he was swallowing them. So one of the cops put his gun in the guy's mouth and said, spit out those drugs or I'm going to blow your head off. And I was like, I don't think I should write that down. and you know, the other suspect ran out the back, so there's people running in all different directions. So now the guy starts to choke. They roll him over on the side, and the guy the cop throws his gun to the side because he wants to get his hand in the guy's mouth to get the drugs out. This is what happens when we're all watching like TV. We're all at home watching Dancing with the Stars. This is what these guys do. They're dancing with the stars, all right. So the gun's lying on the ground. There's a loose suspect running around, jumping over hedges. Neighbors are coming out going, these people have been selling drugs for 100 years. Other people go, why are you picking on the nice people that live here? They're all yelling at me, and I'm like, okay, I'm just sitting there. So one of the troopers goes running by, full speed, picks up the gun, and hands it to me. I'm like standing at the end of the driveway with a 45, like a Sig Sauer, like pistol in my hand. I'm like, okay. And people are saying, you cops, like to me, and I'm like, oh. They go, you got a gun? So I take the gun, I put it in the back of my pants, and then I'm thinking, I don't know anything about a Sig Sauer hang. I could shoot my ass off. So I'm like, I have the gun in the back of my pants like they do, and I'm like, but I don't know if the safety's on. And people are yelling at me, what are you doing here? What are these cops doing here? So I kneel down like this, I take the gun out of the back of my pants, and I put it like right here. And every cop that goes by, I go, Bob, Bernie, Mike, take this gun away from me. So finally, a lady comes up, starts screaming at me, and she goes, why are you taking them down in the middle of the day? My kids are watching out the window. I'm like, look, I don't have anything to do with it. I'm just watching. And then they come and they start. Now they got the guy, they got the handcuffs, they found the coke in the trunk. It's a good bust. So they set up a perimeter, they start pushing the people back. Well, I saw the whole thing, and I knew that they'd been following this case for months. Well, I got subpoenaed to testify. The defense wanted to get me on the stand, like in the movies, and get me to reveal the name of the informant, like the rat. And if that happens, then they can attack his criminal record, and they can throw the whole thing out. So the Boston Globe had to hire like a $400 an hour constitutional law lawyer to come and sit at the prosecutor's table and represent me, because I have journalistic privilege and I don't have to reveal the names, because the names were not, they had pseudonyms, they were not named in the article. So the lawyer's up there, and he's a Yale grad, he got a high-powered defense lawyer, he's up there, he's going to be cross-examining me. So before we go into the courtroom, we go into like one of those lawyers' rooms, like as you enter the courtroom, there's two rooms, one on the right, one on the left. We go in with the prosecutor. She looks like she's about 20. She's like a 28-year-old female prosecutor for whatever county Revere is in. What's that? Suffolk County ADA she was. My lawyer, who looks like he was about 19, he was a West Point grad. I remember because he was a small good-looking kid, like small though, with a huge diamond red West Point ring. Was like, it looked like one of those Super Bowl rings. And he was green as the grass. This kid had gone to like Columbia Law, but he graduated like 2 years before that. He had been in Iraq in the second Iraq War, but he had been in charge of one of those Patriot anti-missile batteries, so he wasn't like a foot soldier, he was a captain. So he was like, you know, he had some credentials, but he was green when it came to this kind of law. This is like criminal law, he's a con law guy. So they're sitting in the room and they say, okay, we have to establish that there was, you know, probable cause, and they're gonna hammer Jay on what did he know and when did he know it, and was there probable cause that there were drugs at this house? And was that just based on the informant's testimony, or was it based on prior investigation? So the Revere cops, they were all from Revere. They were all like, yeah, we had this guy, like, just 3 weeks before that, we got a call that he was up in Saugus, that he was dealing heroin out of a hotel room in Saugus. So we got a warrant, I called the judge, we got a warrant, we went up there, we rapped on the door of the hotel room, and we get in there, and he was naked in bed with a woman who was also naked, and they both had drugs. So we arrested him on that, but it was small. It was just like he had 3 bags of heroin, like, so it was just like a misdemeanor charge. But then we started following, we got his cell phone warrant, we started listening to his phone calls. They go, oh, okay, so they're gonna get at this now. Who was in bed with him naked? His sister. The kid from West Point fell off the chair onto the ground. He said, so the probable cause is based on, they arrested him in his hotel room, and he was in bed naked in the middle of relations with his sister. And he said, what the bleep? And the state trooper said, you're not in Kansas anymore. So I go into the courtroom. They finally called me. So you have to wait outside. So all those guys that were in the investigation in that van with me, who were also in the room when the kid from West Point fell on the ground, we're all sequestered. We're all outside the courtroom, so we can't hear the other testimony. So when I go in there, I don't have any of these guys like there to see what I'm saying. Just there's other troopers and other Revere cops there that are going to listen to what I'm saying, go tell them. So I get up on the stand. The guy asked me 6 ways from Sunday. He's trying to get me to reveal the name of this guy, the informant. And every time I was told, like every time they asked that question, so you answer the question, were you there? Yes. You answer the question that you wrote this article, yes I did. Anything that's factual, you answer it truthfully, which I did. But when they come to try to get the name out of you, you wait, and you wait for him to object. The kid from West Point's going to stand up and object on, like, you know, the First and Fourth Amendment of the Constitution. So the judge kept accepting, you know, sustaining the objections and blunting the defense lawyer's attempt to, like, get the name out of me. So I was up there for about 40 minutes, and like they get to some other questions, they try to get you to get your guard down, and then they come back around to that. Well, and one of the key questions was, did you ever step on the property at 2112 River Place, whatever it was? Now, for some reason, I wasn't told by the Globe not to do that, but I had a feeling I shouldn't. So I said, I think he was waiting for that question, because if I step into the crime scene as a civilian, the crime scene is no good anymore. So I said, I remained on the public way. He said, you remained on the public way during the entirety of the arrest and the aftermath? I said, yes, I never went beyond the street. And then you could see he was pissed. Wow. So then one of the Revere cops got up and left and went and told those guys, yeah, they asked him if he went into the crime scene, and he said he stayed on the public way. So afterwards, like everybody was buying me drinks, because the guy got convicted. He got 8 years on that charge, and then I stayed up all night. The night they arrested him, I stayed up all night in the Revere police station, because they had a feeling that he was someone else also. That his name was Felix Miranda, like Miranda is the suspect. And they said, this is not his real name. He had like a Social Security card and a driver's license, but they ran his prints through the federal database, and he had 2 different names, and he was wanted. He had escaped from prison in Chicago, and he was wanted for a trial in New Hampshire. So he was going to serve 8 years in Massachusetts without chance of parole, then go back and serve the rest of his term in Chicago, and then New Hampshire was going to get him next. So this was a big case. This guy's going to end up serving like 24 years. He was a habitual heroin dealer. And when we first went to meet him, the informant bought heroin from him, and I was in the informant's Cadillac in the back seat, and the state trooper was in the front seat. And they got out of the car, they did this heroin deal, and they came back, and the trooper was explaining to me where it came from, the journey that it goes through from Laos, from the Golden Triangle, Laos, Burma, through the Corsican Mafia, like through the Italian Mafia to Corsica, to the DR through organized crime there, and then distributed like to the United States. And then he put it in my hand, and it was dusted on the outside, and he goes, and the informant is a heroin dealer. He's a heroin dealer, user, professional snitch. And he's like, you want to try it? I was like, no. And like, he got out of the car for a second, and the state trooper that was a good friend of mine, he appeared as a character in my book, he was sitting there, and the guy had bought a drink from, the guy looked like a talking frog in a children's store. He was like 350 pounds, and he kind of like walked and talked like a frog. And he had bought one of these mocha frappe banana coffee nut hazelnut things with whipped cream at the top. So while we're waiting for the heroin dealer, these two guys are talking like two, as my grandmother would say, like two fishwives. They were talking back and forth. Hey, where'd you get that? That looks good. What is it? It's a banana hazelnut. And then so he goes, and he's been drinking out of the straw, right? And he's drank about 2 inches off the top of this gallon and a half of this shit that he's drinking. And he says, he goes, it's bananas, coconut, latte, this and that, but I got skim milk. The state trooper goes, you got skim milk? He goes, well, I want to feel like I'm trying. And he goes, try it, have some. Now he gets out of the, you can't trust these guys as far as you get told. He gets out of the, I got to take this call, like he's got to leave the state trooper. And he's out there talking on the phone. And I'm in the back seat, now I've already like Purelled my hand. And he leaves the thing in the little drink holder thing, and my buddy picks it up and I go, you're not gonna friggin' drink that, are you? He goes, you said it's good. I go, you're gonna put your mouth on that cup? Are you out of your mind? And then the guy, I said, who knows what he's got? So he ends up putting the drink back in the holder, and then the guy got in the back of the car. Long story short, 5 years later, right, that state trooper is in prison, just got out, 8 years, for allowing that informant to run an OxyContin business back and forth between Boston and Florida. He got grabbed by another state trooper in the airport, and they used him to turn on this state trooper. The state trooper that was my friend, ended up going to prison. He's just got out, he's in a halfway house like 6, 7 years later. His story is, and was, and he's now collaborating with a different writer and everything, on a book, was that he had uncovered in this heroin OxyContin ring, he had uncovered a plot that he had given information about to the CIA, that there was a group of organized crime, like the remnants of the mafia in Rhode Island, was running this oxys back and forth, and were in league with some jihadists that were in Montreal that were going to fill small planes with explosives and fly those into like oil, like the big Bay State gas tank that you see alongside 93. So the trooper's story all along was, I was allowing the lesser evil in order to like entrap these drug dealers, the mafia drug dealers that were in league with like the jihadists in Toronto and Montreal. And he ended up like, when push came to shove, and I got subpoenaed for that trial too, he ended up taking a plea. And he said, the reason is like, I can't like expose a national security thing, so I gotta go to jail. So who knows what the real story is, but those two guys both ended up in the can, and I was in the back seat of the car with. Fascinating story. Do I have time for one more?
You do, yeah.
Yeah.
As long as you want.
So,
Just need to listen.
Yeah.
I thought you guys were kicking us out.
No.
So, I'll finish with a story that appeared in my book, this Memoirs of a Rugby Playing Man. This took place in Wales. When I was just out of college, I had played varsity sports as an undergraduate and picked up rugby as a club sport. So I was a soccer player and a wrestler in college, and then I had a cup of coffee playing junior hockey in Nova Scotia as well, where I had to I was 18, I was away from home, there was no internet. I tried out for the varsity, and the varsity coach said, we have a 25-year-old goalie that's coming back, and he said, but I like your skating, and I'm gonna hook you up with one of the local junior A teams and see if they will take you and get some seasoning, and then you come back and play for us next year. So I used to have to get my goalie equipment. I don't know anyone. I've been there for like 2 weeks. I'm in Nova Scotia. I have to hike with my big goalie bag up to the top of the hill behind the campus, get on the Trans-Canada Highway and wait for the coach to drive by, pick me up and drive me 15 miles into Kentfield to go to practice. It was hell. So they cut me. They invited me back because the coach that cut me, the other guy said, no, we want to keep him, And then, so I was off and on the team for like 3 weeks. And then they cut me again, and I was like, good. So I went off on the soccer team. So I'm kind of like a jack of all trades, master of none when it comes to sports. And I picked up rugby as a club sport as an undergraduate. Then I went to Florida as a grad student. I played rugby we won the state championship collegiates, then we won the Southeast United States collegiates, and then we went to the East Coast collegiates final 16, and we lost to West Point and the Naval Academy. We beat Maryland, and then we lost to West Point, and we lost to the Naval Academy, and we got knocked out. But back then, graduate students could play in the NCAA, like collegiate rugby championships, and foreign students could play. So our team was made up of, our starting team was of 15 players, had 7 foreigners. We had an Argentine, a South African, we had a Trinidadian, 2 Brits. We had a really good team, and then I played a position where I could use sort of my soccer and wrestling skills. So after that, the economy in the early 80s, if you recall, was kind of like it is now. There weren't many jobs around. So one of my friends from undergraduate school owned a health club in Toronto. So I went to work for him, managing his health club, and I had a $400 a week paycheck under the table. I had a company car, which was a brand new Trans Am. I had a free apartment in Burlington, Ontario, actually Waterdown, Ontario, which is adjacent to Burlington. And I got to work out for free in the gym before I came on to my work shift. And then they had a very good rugby team in Burlington, which was made up of mostly expatriate Welshmen. So I got to play for this Welsh like infested Canadian rugby team. On their starting team, there was 2 Canadians, 1 American, me, and then the rest were all Welshmen that had moved to Canada. So we had a really good team, and they invited me to go on a first-class tour to Wales, to play rugby in Wales the following fall. So I said I would, and that sounded great. All we had to do was pay for our airline tickets, and the clubs pay for everything else, like suit, tie, bag, gear, housing, meals, transportation within Wales and England. It was really a fantastic offer. So I said I would, and then right towards the end of the season, we had a great spring. I think we were like 8-1-1, and I got a bid to play for the Niagara like rugby union select team, so things were looking good. And then one day I was in my office and I got arrested by Immigration Canada for not having a visa. And my friend told me all along, he was kind of like a con man. He had told me like, well, I incorporated this company in Detroit and Toronto, so you're working as a consultant for my American company. I believed him. So they came in one day and like took me out in handcuffs just about and said, you can't work in Canada like without a visa. And I was like, oh, I thought I had a mulligan. And because I'd been in Canada for 5 years, I felt kind of like I was Canadian because I went to school there. And so I get taken into like the manpower like detention center, and my friend who could talk the birds out of the trees, as my grandmother would say, he convinced them not only was I an invaluable asset to the company, but they gave me a 30-day working visa. Instead of arresting me and deporting me, they let me stay for 30 more days and work legally while we hired and trained my new replacement. Which we had no idea who that was, but so I got to stay in the country. I didn't get any, smirch on my immigration record, and then towards the end of June, I had to choose, like either continue working and hope they don't come back and ask for or try to apply for an extension, for a 6-month extension. And I was talking to my parents on the phone, and they said, you're going to want to go back to reunions at Acadia, you're going to want to go visit all your friends in Canada, you don't want to get deported. So why don't you just come home and then get a summer job here and then see if you can apply long distance, whatever. Well, it's a good thing I did, because I came home, I'd been away for the last like 6 years pretty much. I'd been at undergraduate school and then Denver for a while. I went to law school for a semester, didn't like it. Then I went to University of Florida and got my creative writing degree. So I hadn't been around my parents very often except for Christmas and a couple of those summers. So I was home for a week and my father died of a heart attack.
Oh.
Thankfully, I was there. I had been there, spent a week with him, talked to him every day, went fishing with him, and was there like in between his first heart attack and his fatal heart attack at Holy Family. I was there. So it was a tough summer because he was younger than I am now. He was very different from me. He was about 6 feet tall, 270 pounds. He looked like Sebastian Cabot from Family Affair. He had a beard with the 2 gray streaks right here. Very, very well-liked, well-respected, gregarious man about Methuen Square. He owned a small insurance agency in Methuen Square and knew everybody. So he was the leader of not just our immediate family, but the expanded family. Anybody had a problem, they went to Big Jim. So it was tough, because I was the oldest, and I had to handle all the arrangements with my mom and all that. So that summer was tough, and about 2/3 of the way through the summer, the coach called me from the team up in Canada and said, I remember going to the funeral home, and there was a huge like bouquet, like a horseshoe from the rugby club, Centaurs Rugby Club. And my mother was like, "That's the guys up in Canada." I go, "That's them right there." So the coach must have like got called and got the information collected from all the guys, because it was like one of those ones that they give to the mob bosses. Huge horseshoe of roses. So so they were in my mind. Their club was in my mind, but I wasn't training. I wasn't doing anything. I was sleeping until noontime. I was really hurting bad. I finally got a job working down in Woburn I had a graduate degree in English, and I was working at a warehouse, second shift, stocking parts. They immediately made me supervisor. They were like, after a week, they go, "You're like the smartest guy in the whole company. We're going to give you this little golf cart and just ride around this warehouse and pick out all these computer parts." It was like weighing computer parts. Pick out all these computer parts and put them in these FedEx boxes and let the other guys just sweep the floor and stuff. So I had a job for the summer. The coach calls me up and says, "Listen," he said, "the boys would really like you to come on this trip. You have 6 weeks." Would you like some water, man? Do you have any water? This poor lady. I'd give you some of this, but I already drank from it, even though my mouth is cleaner than that.
I don't know, from some of your stories.
Where's the driven stuff? I go to mass every week.
Doesn't mean a thing.
Yeah, especially these days. So the coach calls me up, he says, "The team would really like you to come on this trip, be good for you. I know you had a tough summer." Now it's been my father's been gone about 6 weeks. And I said, "I don't know." His name was Cy Beachy. Gave me the best advice I could ever give an athlete. And when I was young, I didn't understand. But now that I still train 6 days a week, every day when I start to train, I think of Cy Beachy saying in his Welsh accent, "Remember, lad, train, don't strain." I didn't know what that meant back then, because I'd be doing all this stuff, getting hurt all the time. Beachy also said when we went to Wales, because I'll tell you in a minute how we went to Wales, but we went to Wales, and we were driving through those. Every town in Wales has rugby goalposts. They have a rugby club. They have a stadium. It's unbelievable. We grew up where we just co-opt a soccer field and turn it into a rugby field for the day. There's rugby stadiums everywhere. So we were driving between Cardiff and Aberavon where we were going to play, and we happened to pass through, and I think he did this on purpose, on the bus, we passed through Cy Beachy's hometown, our coach's hometown. He was like 45-year-old guy, red face, drank a lot, very charismatic guy. And he says, "Lads," he gets on the microphone in the bus, he says, "Lads, if you look to the left, you'll see the house where I was born." And one of the other Welshmen grabs the microphone and says, "And if you look to the right, you'll see the pond where he learned to walk on water." So, Cy says to me, he goes, "The guys really like you on this trip and all that." And he says, and I'm thinking, I'd like to go, but I don't know if I'm up for it. I don't know if I can get in that kind of shape to go play against those kind of teams. And he says, "Well, listen," he goes, "the guys want you." He goes, "We need you on this trip. We need you. We're not going to use," and name the other 2 guys in my position. He goes, "One was a Welshman, one was an Englishman. This was a big compliment." He goes, "We want you to come and play." we're gonna pay your way, like, just come, you'll have a great time. It was 3.5 weeks away from my mom and all that, and my siblings were all hurting. So I ended up going on the trip, and I'll read a short passage, and this is one of the things that happened. We went to this is the first match that I was selected to play in, so there was 6 matches, and I was selected to play 4 times. And the other guys got to play 1 each. There was some bad ill will there, because I wasn't coming back, I couldn't, and they were gonna compete for the job when they got back to Canada. So we're going to Chepstow, which is a small town, but at the time they were playing in the Welsh First Division. So rugby in Wales up until the 90s was compulsory in the schools for boys. Every Welsh schoolboy under the age of 14 had to play rugby. And from that, they've created from this tiny nation one of the top like half dozen rugby countries in the world. So this was a first division men's club. These guys would all be like 18, 19, 20, 21, all having played since they were 5 years old, and these are the best of the best of the best that live in that area. The match was played on a well-maintained pitch flanked by 2 boxed wooden grandstands. After dressing in silence, the starting 15 gathered in a little anteroom in the clubhouse, our cleats knocking against the stone floor. There we sang a surprisingly emotional version of O Canada and ran onto the field. It's amazing how these transplanted Welshmen had adapted Canada as their home. So they were very emotional to go back and play rugby in Wales, but they also felt very connected to Canada. And when they sang O Canada, it was very moving. I mean, the hair was standing up on the back of my neck. A smattering of applause floated down from the crowd. The home team was already out there going through pre-game drills. They had 2 kickers, a lefty and a righty, who were booming punts worthy NFL and putting balls through the goalpost from unworldly angles and distances. Although that sort of finesse was quite different from the grinding of the forwards, the kicker's performance sent my heart rate soaring. I hadn't felt this much anxiety since my first ever match back in Nova Scotia against those coal miners from Stellarton. I didn't have to wait for very long for their hooker's prophecy to come true. I play a position called hooker, and the night before we'd been out in the town having a beer, and we ran into the hooker for the other team, who was a formidable-looking dude, and he played rugby for the county side, so he was good. And he said, "You're the hooker for the other team." I go, "Yeah." He goes, "You're going to get your wings tomorrow, lad." And it wasn't like in a friendly way. And I go, "Hey, nice meeting you." So now, like, this is what happened. Didn't have to wait long for their hooker's prophecy to come true. Chepstow's lefty kicked off the ball on a rising parabolic flight that barely cleared the required 10 yards. No sooner had Alf Glazebrook taken down the kick when several opposing forwards piled into him and the ball was buried in the tackle. The referee awarded the ensuing scrum to our side, digging in his heel to show us the mark. The Centaurs, regular tight head prop, Tony Spencer, the former international player, hadn't made the trip, unfortunately for me. Glazebrook had moved back to second row because of our shortage there, and up front I was playing with 2 guys I hadn't scrummaged with very much, except in training sessions. Jeff Coles, or Colsey, was a closed-mouthed Gloucesterman, like Steve Carter. This is Gloucester, England, not Gloucester, Mass. A no-nonsense 30-year-old whose motto in rugby and in life was retaliation first. Of all the players on tour, I knew Jeff Coles and Steve Carter the least, though I'd played with them back in Ontario. Being Englishmen, Colsey and Carter favored their young countrymen for the A-side hooker's position. At least that was my guess. And both players knew I was going back to Massachusetts after the tour and wouldn't be playing with the Centaurs in the playoffs. So there was a measure of coolness in their attitude toward me. With his bulky torso, black eyes, and large rounded brow, Colsey looked like a gun-toting thug in a Jimmy Cagney movie, though with a sly sense of humor and an intelligent glint in his eye. I wasn't too worried about Colsey. To my left, our loosehead prop was a former wrestler and middle linebacker who'd been playing rugby since high school. But when we solidified our 8-man pack, took our binds, and prepared to engage with Chepstow, their front row, just a yard away, resembled a trio of bridge abutments. With mangled ears, sloping shoulders, and wide necks, the Chepstow props and hookers stared across at us, chests rising and falling in unison, the veins standing out in their foreheads. Just as the referee said, "Engage," I could make out the evil glimmer of a smile pass across their tight head's face. Immediately, the scrum compressed in a manner I had never experienced before. Our shove, coming mainly from the second row, was somehow harnessed, managed is a better way to describe it, by the momentum of their tight five shooting across the gap. The result being that I was initially pushed downward, so low that my chin was between my knees, and with tons of force simultaneously coming from behind me and in front of me, I was robbed of my breath. Next, as Chepstow's pack surged forward, all 8 men churning in lockstep, the downward pressure rolled upward. The line of their shoulders was beneath ours now, lifting me up higher and higher until my feet were off the ground, pawing at thin air. My neck was at an ungodly angle. For half a second, I flashed on the image of Seamus, this is a guy I know from Boston, in his wheelchair. He had his neck broken in this situation. My head was pushed downward, my chin denting my upper chest, and my legs flailing as I tried to get my feet down. Still, Chepstow moved forward. Using my peripheral vision, I saw Colsey, all 225 pounds of him, lifted into the air. Our front row was completely off the ground, our scrum coming apart. It was terrifying. I resisted the temptation to cry out. I'm not sure I could have opened my mouth anyway, and it would have been a sign of weakness a minute into my first match on tour. I could hear the cervical vertebrae grinding in my neck, the tendons stretched to their limit, but I kept my cool, relaxing as much as possible given the position I was in. I was hoping that the ball would exit the scrum at either end, I didn't care which, or the referee would blow the whistle for dangerous play. A few years later, lifting the front row would become illegal in rugby across the world, since a number of players at various levels of competition were catastrophically injured that way. Besides, I was pissed off at my helplessness over being dominated from the get-go in front of so many people, at the tight head prop's little smirk, and at the notion that I was quote-unquote earning my wings. Finally, the whistle blew, the pressure relented, and Colsey and I thudded to the turf. Colsey got up first, stuck out his hand, and yanked me to my feet. First time he'd ever done that. All right, mate? He asked. I'm all right. Immediately, we faced the trial of another scrum, only this time it was Chepstow's ball. For the first time in as many matches as I could recall, I kept both feet in pushing position, never attempting to steal their ball. That was part of the reason for Chepstow's tactics, intimidation being the other part. And I needed a minute or two to regain my senses, to swallow the fear that had welled up in my throat, and start playing rugby. Twice more in the first half, Chepstow lifted our front row despite our resolve to win the ball and stay on the ground. It was frightening and demoralizing each time. There was nothing to be done about superior technique, and I lost 3 or 4 scrums that way, which had never occurred in North America. I struggled in those set pieces to keep my nerve, and afterward had to calm myself, steadying my feet and my throwing arm when the referee called for me to throw the ball in. Every scrum arrived with a sense of dread, though I received little sympathy from the referee and none from the opposing forwards. It was the closest I've ever come to life and death in a sporting event, and the seconds crawled by like hours in the brief span before the ball came into the tunnel. In the second half, fatigue among players on both sides reduced the danger in the scrums, and the pace of the game, to some extent, began to come back to my level. It was a lesson that I'd carry with me in the hundreds of matches that I'd eventually play. Hang on for the first few engagements, maintain your nerve, and let your fitness take over. I didn't come anywhere near stealing a tight head, but I was getting most of my own ball at least. Trying my best to contribute in other aspects of the game, I made a couple of tackles, cleaned up a few loose or bounding balls, and threw a clean line out in Chepstow's end that led to a penalty against them and 3 points for us on the kick. But lose the scrimmaging and you lose the match, which we did by 18 points, which actually wasn't a bad result. And I walked off with my head down when the ref blew his whistle for full time, going straight off the pitch and alongside the painted wooden facade of the grandstand. Now here's the really important part. In the changing room, I hated every one of those Chepstow sons of bitches, especially their front row. To my mind, they had deliberately tried to injure my teammates and me, and I was furious about that. When I finally got up in my shorts and flip-flops carrying a towel, an attendant said there weren't any showers, just something called a Welsh bath. It was a square, featureless room with 2 facing doors, no windows, and a row of wooden pegs along each of the blank concrete walls. The doors opened into the home teams and visitors' changing rooms, and sunk into the floor was an immense tub, 3 feet deep, which took up nearly all the available space. Filled to the brim with scalding hot water, the bath, obscured by thick piles of steam, had a concrete bench all the way around that permitted you to sit in the water up to your neck. As I entered the warm, vapor-infused chamber, hanging my towel on a peg, players from both teams were easing themselves into the bath, talking and joking now, mostly in Welsh. There was just enough room for all 30 players, arranged cheek by jowl. Since the field had been muddy and there was no place to rinse off, as more fellows climbed into the bath, the water turned a dingy gray color. There wasn't any seating arrangement. When I lowered myself into the water, so hot as to be nearly intolerable, I found myself jammed between Chepstow's loose head prop and their number 8. Their other prop was wedged in next to Colsey across the way, and the Chepstow player gestured toward me with his chin, saying something in Welsh to the guy beside me, and their loose head slung his arm over my shoulder and replied in his native tongue, winking at me. The changing room attendant was a thin, porcupine-headed fellow, past the age of 50, and dressed in black trousers, white shirt, and an apron that hung to his knees. He had a long, dour-looking face, a nose like a shattered red pear, and pendulous earlobes that fluttered when he came around with a tray and handed each of us a cup of hot tea. It seemed odd to have tea immediately after a match when the usual impulse was to guzzle cold water or Gatorade, but the tea, brewed strong with a dash of milk, was just the right thing after playing 80 minutes of rugby. After the cups had been given out, fragile bits of eggshell china imprinted with the Chepstow RFC, that's Rugby Football Club, insignia, the same long-faced, porcupine-headed attendant came back around and handed each of us a biscuit, a small, hard, shortbread-flavored cookie that you dunked in the milky tea while soaking in the bath. We lounged in the tub for half an hour until the water turned black and tepid, and our voices rose in a din as we kidded each other and talked about the match. No one was allowed in the bath except the players and the lone attendant, and he only when he had business there. When we finally climbed out, possessed by a keen sense of fellowship, we adjourned to the changing rooms to get dressed. We entered the clubhouse bar in our tour blazers and ties, where I leaned up by the taps with Chepstow's props and Colsey, who smacked me on the head and placed a pint in front of me. The bar was snug and cozy, paneled in dark wood that rose head high, then a few feet of white plaster wall. Hung in this space and ringing the bar were a series of portraits, varying from old-fashioned oil paintings near the entrance to black and white and then color photographs. These portraits depicted the first side captains that had graced the Chepstow pitch since the club's inaugural season in 1878. The Welsh Rugby Union was formed 3 years later, in 1881. Armed with my pint, I took a tour around the small crowded pub, studying each of these ruddy-faced lads, seated on a stool and wearing the club jersey and crest, which hadn't changed much in 100 years. Rugby was compulsory in the Welsh schools, part of the national identity, and the country itself, with a population roughly equal to the state of Connecticut, had been an international powerhouse since the origin of the sport. Every little village had a rugby pitch and a clubhouse, and most had a ring of portraits like the one I was looking at. Traditionally, when the men came up from the pit, the coal mine, grimy from head to foot, they blew off steam in a vigorous game of rugby and then climbed into the bath for a cup of char, or tea. Once all the players were in the bar, Chepstow's president, a tall white-haired gent, welcomed the visiting tourists and remarked on the hardness of the match. Cy Beachy spoke next, his face squeezed crimson by his tight collar and tie. He thanked Chepstow for being such gracious hosts and got choked up when he said how pleased he was to be home again in Wales after the passage of quite a few years. Next, a dozen or so Chepstow players, all wearing club blazers and neckties, were formed into a choir against the wall. Accustomed as I was to bawdy rugby songs, I was surprised when the Chepstow boys launched into a medley of traditional Welsh hymns. Blending their voices perfectly, the choir, including their loose head prop and scrum half, who I'd been looking at all afternoon, sang Penty Fedwin, Men of Harlech, and Speed Your Journey, with a great deal of skill and feeling. Some of the fellows had long, drooping mustaches, like lancers or dragoons, and while they sang, I compared their bruised and abraded faces to the portraits from the club's early days, noting that little had changed in that part of the world. The Welsh singing was a far cry from, I used to work in Chicago and I don't want to join the army. When the choir finished, one of our wingers, John Griffiths, who was from Cardiff originally and played rugby there, set aside his pint and went over in front of the choir. With the others providing background harmony, Griff matched his beautiful tenor voice with the old Welsh standard, My Fanwy, a lament of missed chances and lost love. In Welsh it begins, and I'll read Welsh best I can, Paham me dictor, o my Fanwy, yin lenvith liad dwan di. His hands clasped in front of him, Griff sang in a sweet, mellow tone, his eyes turned upward like an angel in a painting by Raphael. Though I couldn't understand the words, by the final chorus the emotion of the song was clear to me, as well as the hard guys ranged all around, their faces thoughtful, their aspect more childlike than they ever appeared on a rugby field. And now translated into English. Forget now all words of promise you made to one who loved you well. Give me your hand, my sweet, my Fanway, but one last time to say farewell. All I could think of was how much my dad would have enjoyed being there. Standing with Cy and the vice chairman, dressed in his blazer and wingtip shoes, holding a pint glass. Thank you.
How does your son feel about, how old is your son now?
My son is 18.
How does he feel about your stories?
He likes it.
Yeah, right. Is he trying to emulate you?
Well, he's playing hockey, but my son has Asperger's syndrome,
Oh, okay.
so he's high functioning.
Excuse me.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming. He's high functioning autistic kid. So considering all that he's had to overcome, he's going to UMaine on a scholarship, and he's not to play hockey, but he's going to play hockey
Yeah,
there.
he's doing well then.
And academically, he's doing well. Yeah. He's out with his friends tonight. He works at the library in Bethune, and he coaches hockey with me in a kids program called the Bethune Fun Hockey League. So he's a good kid.
Yeah.
And I'm going to miss him when he goes to school.
Yeah, but it's interesting, but when you think of the things you've done, you know, and I'm sure he's read your stories and heard
He's
all.
read all my
Yeah.
books, yeah. He's quite a reader, so he's been reading my stuff since he was probably like 12. or
So he
13.
probably gets, you know, he's living vicariously in some ways.
And all these friends of mine are all around in our lives, like
Yeah.
they're like his uncles.
Oh, okay.
And I have two brothers too.
Yeah.
And so he's got like these sort of role models around him,
Yeah.
because they're all professionals. Like John
Yeah.
is doing his postdoctoral year, and
Right,
my friend Chris Pierce, who went on a lot of the trips in the other book,
yeah.
he owns a physical therapy and rehabilitation business and has two kids.
Hmm.
So my son looks up, you know, that whole thing, it takes a village, like it's not
Yeah.
just me.
Oh,
'Cause
yeah.
I'm a solo, single parent with custody,
Oh,
so it's just
okay.
he and I.
Yeah.
But then he's got his cousins, my brothers and sisters, their families, and all my rugby friends and their families, so. It's a lot like it would be in Wales. I mean, in
Yeah.
Wales,
Yeah.
when you go to the pub in Wales, or England, or Ireland, or Northern Ireland, all places I've gone to play rugby, the grandparents are in one corner in one
Yeah.
snug,
Yeah.
but they know their grandchildren are there.
Oh,
Their
yeah.
18,
Right.
19-year-old grandchildren are with their friends
Yeah.
listening to music on the other side, and then the parents are there with their friends playing cards.
Yeah.
Everyone is there. It's like the family living room,
Mhm.
Should
because
be
their
that way,
houses
yeah.
are so small, you know. I
Right.
know when I went to Wales for the first time, we brought all swag to give away. So I went to Boston and I bought Red Sox hats, Celtics and Bruins shirts, because they can't get that over there. So we stayed at this place, the first town we went to, they put us up in their houses. So basically, they gave us like the master bedroom. It was only like
Oh,
one
yeah.
bedroom.
Yeah, they do.
And they slept
Yeah.
like on the couch and the floor, the husband and wife.
Right.
He was a rugby player and his wife, right? But I found out later, I'd given him a Red Sox hat. And it was like a nice one, you know, back, this was like in the 80s. So it was like the red one with the blue bill. And his wife got really mad because he wouldn't take it off when he went to bed. So for 3 nights he wore the Red Sox hat to bed. Which is funny. And some of the people I met in Wales and England, like I still talk to them on email or
Yeah,
Facebook,
yeah.
and this was like a while ago. The last competitive tour I went on was Argentina and then Mexico in the early '90s, where I was a representative player. But the last tour I went on that was like open, where the players were in their 20s and 30s, was last May. I went to Montana and played in the Montana Maggot Fest, and I played 3 matches in 1 day.
They call you dad.
Yeah, we won the tournament too. I didn't play in the finals because they had a younger guy that could
Yeah.
play in the finals, but I played in 3 matches in a day, and then we got the trophy and all that. It's very satisfying to be out there with guys that are like 25.
Yeah, you bet.
And like, I played in Philadelphia about a month ago, and we won 55-33, and the guys were played together as a club year round, and they're all in their 20s. We have guys that come in from different cities, and we meet. We have 1 practice, and then we play. So it's fun still.
Good for you.
But any questions? I know you guys have been here for a while. I do have some books for sale, and they're discounted to $20 because they have a box of them. I wanna get rid of them. And I'll be happy to answer questions individually, or
Well, I enjoyed your talk.
Oh,
That's
that's a
fine.
big day.
Yeah.
Thank you.
was it surprised compared to what you thought it was going to be?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Didn't really,
You didn't know? Because I mean, it had a title, Adventures of a Street Journalist, but
Yeah.
that could be it.
yeah.
And I just told 4 of like 400
Yeah.
stories.
Oh, I bet you, yeah.
Next time I'll tell you about. No.
Well, it wasn't only the stories, it was your presentation.
Yes.
Yes,
Yeah.
you did a nice job.
Thank you very much.
Oh, my pleasure. I really enjoyed it.
was entertaining.
Pro baseball player.
just visualizing.
Exactly.
Pro baseball player.
His last name is Bowden.
How, is what?
Is Bowden.